morning, good afternoon, or good evening. Depends on the day of the time you're listening to us. My name is Leonardo Lampret, and welcome back to another episode of Scares and Tales. Today, we will be discussing the variance request under the New Yorker Compensation Medical Treatment Guidelines, and more importantly, how a carrier or employer should properly deny one. So let's start discussing with what exactly is variance. Well, a variance is a request for treatment that exceeds the frequency or duration permitted by the guidelines, is not recommended by the guidelines, or is not addressed by them. The treating provider bears the burden of proving that the requested treatment is appropriate, medically necessary, and likely to benefit the claimant. Now, before we actually deny the variance, we should ask three basic questions. First, did the provider explain why the treatment is medically necessary for this particular claimant? Second, did the provider explain why treatment available under the guidelines is not appropriate or sufficient? And third, if additional treatment is requested, did the provider document objective functional improvement and explain why further improvement is reasonably expected? A proper denial must be specific. It is not enough to simply state that the provider failed to meet the burden of proof or that the treatment is not medically necessary. The response should identify what evidence is missing and connect the deficiency to the applicable medical treatment guidelines. For example, the request for 12 additional physical therapy visits is denied because the provider did not document objective functional improvement from the treatment already completed. The records contain subjective reports of pain, but no measurable improvement in range of motion, strength, endurance, activities of daily living, or work capacity. One of the things that you also have to be careful about is timing, because the board strictly enforces its deadlines. If you want to deny the variance without obtaining an IME or a review of records, you must respond within 15 calendar days after receiving the variance request. So if you want to have an IME scheduled or you want an IME to review the records before responding to the variance, you must notify the board and the provider within 5 business days that you want to have the claimant examined by the IME or that you want your IME to review the records. And once you do that, then you have 30 days to respond after receiving the variance request by either approving or denying the medical treatment request. If you do deny the medical treatment request based on the IME opinion, you have to identify the IME opinion and you have to refer in the variance denial to that IME opinion. Finally, you should also raise every applicable objection in your denial. For example, even if the requested treatment may be medically necessary, you must specifically preserve any objection, for example, that the treatment is not causally related to the established claim. Any available ground that is not expressly raised may be deemed waived and may not be considered later, regardless of its potential merit. The board will most likely consider it waived because the law requires that you raise any and all objection that you believe that are applicable when it comes to the variance denials. And long story short, what we're trying to say here is that the variance process is very demanding and you need to pay careful attention to both substance and procedure. Before submitting a denial, you should confirm the applicable deadline, identify every applicable objection, provide a detailed basis for each objection, and ensure that the response is filed through the proper channel. A missed deadline, an omitted objection, or vague language can turn an otherwise valid defense into an expensive authorization for treatment. In variance practice, even a small procedural error can have a significant and irreversible consequence that can be very, very expensive for you. Thank you for tuning in and see you next month.